I'm Monica Smith. I'm a club historian, but I also work at the Smithsonian. And so I like to give historical moments about people, places, and communities in our nation's capital as context to the club that we so much love and enjoy. And today, given time constraints, I'm actually going to quote from an article a colleague of mine wrote, but it's based on some research, in fact, that I've done myself. So I hope you'll enjoy it. But I always like to bring a little something about our history. And today I thought I would talk about Washington, D.C. as an emerging center for science through the lens of Alexander Graham Bell, who was a prominent resident here, for those of you who don't know. So let me just set the scene. So as my colleague Amanda Murray wrote, so if had your train rolled into the District of Columbia around 1870, you might not have thought of this as a particularly innovative place or even a particularly pleasant place. You might have been too distracted by the smell. The Washington City Canal, which was part of L'Enfant's original plan for the city, had fallen into disuse and was basically a stagnant open sewer by 1870, which is just 5 years after the end of the US Civil War. So the district was home at the time to about 130,000 people who lacked basic sanitation. Things began to change in 1871. A new city government took over and tried to modernize the nation's capital. You can see here the Capitol building was still, just very basic dirt roads, and this is one of the nicer parts at the time. So Alexander Shepard is the director of the DC Board of Public Works, and he spent over 20 million US dollars, which in 1870s was a lot, to improve the city. And they put in railroad tracks and graded the streets, sidewalks paved, bridges built, and a water and sewer system was installed and trees planted. The squalid Tiber Creek section of the canal was covered over in a new street, which you may know as the Constitution Avenue, which runs along the National Mall, was built over the canal. Washington's status as a swampy, undeveloped town really belied the visionary activity that was brewing here. Federal agencies like the U.S. Patent Office had made the city a science hub where inventors and entrepreneurs would convene, and organizations sprouted to support invention, discovery, and economic development. At the helm of the Smithsonian, of course, played a part of this, was the first Secretary Joseph Henry, who not only was a scientist in his own right, but also made extraordinary contributions to organizing American science in this country. It started with him founding the Philosophical Society of Washington, where he held Saturday meetings at his own home for prominent men interested in science who were here. Another perhaps surprising participant in all of this city's transformation was Scottish-born inventor Alexander Graham Bell, most famous for the telephone. His connections, I'll tell you about, sort of give you a good sense of the very quick growth, actually, of science in this country. In 1876, he had received the telephone patent that you probably know about. 2 years later, he and his wife moved from Boston to Washington, D.C. And the following year, the French government awarded Bell the Volta Prize of 50,000 francs, which is about 10,000 US dollars, for his invention of the telephone. So Bell used that money to found the Volta Laboratory in Georgetown. Some of you who live here may be familiar with Volta Place in Georgetown and wonder why it was called that. Well, it's based on this prize that Bell won. So he started this Volta Lab in Georgetown with his cousin, Chichester Bell, and a friend, Charles Sumner Painter. The team recorded a research sound recording and transmission. In 1887, they sold their record patents to the American Gramophone Company. So his work was not only for the telephone, he actually made improvements upon Edison's phonograph. Using some of the profits he made from that sale to the Gramophone Company, he actually founded the Volta Bureau for the increase and diffusion of knowledge related to the deaf. He himself had been a teacher of the deaf, and his wife and mother were deaf. The Volta Bureau still stands, and in fact, the famous deaf activist Helen Keller was present at the groundbreaking in Georgetown. Complementing the lab was a special annex in Bell's home devoted to gatherings of the city's elite, including politicians, government officials, scientists, artists, writers, and musicians. And so this network of connected individuals reflects sort of this growth of formal and institutional support for this scientific community. To give you a sense of the fast growth, by 1900, there were 10 scientific societies in Washington with a total membership exceeding 4,000 people. Congress founded the National Academy of Sciences, shown here in 1863. The Academy also elected Bell as a member in 1883. There's the Cosmos Club, some of you may know, as a gathering place for men of letters and science, which was started in the home of geologist John Wesley Powell, who was the director of the Smithsonian Bureau of Ethnology. The Anthropological Society was founded in 1879. The next year, the Biological Society. In 1884, the Chemical Society. Alexander Graham Bell's father-in-law, Gardner Hubbard, founded the National Geographic Society in 1888, which you're probably familiar with, and Bell became its president in 1897. He was also elected to the Smithsonian's Board of Regents. So clearly Bell was a very integral part of this whole community. Now, for all this growth, you have to remember that efforts to organize science in this part of the century did not extend equally to all practitioners, certainly not women and people of color. For example, the founder of the American Medical Association deliberately excluded the racially integrated National Medical Society from admission into the AMA. So in 1884, a separate medical society was organized by a biracial group of physicians, and it is still here in DC. It's the I can never get this word right, Chirurgical Society of the District of Columbia. Just to wrap up, Bell and his fellow inventors at the Volta Lab, who had made these cutting edge advances in recording sound, actually deposited their sealed boxes at the Smithsonian as insurance against competitors, proving their invention's precedence. And this would actually play into a big legal fight. Inside the box, which wasn't opened until 1937, they had descriptions and illustrations of all of Volta Lab's early recording inventions, including a progenitor of modern fiber optics, which enabled the transmission of sound on a beam of light, and the graphophone that I mentioned before. So this is all to say that this city, which is generally known as a federal city pushing around paper, is actually a city that has a very strong basis in science and technology. And I hope that you find it interesting to learn about Bell's work as sort of the center of these connections in Washington that augment our understanding not only of his career, but of the city's evolution, and offer a unique lens to review the rebuilding of a capital city and indeed of a nation and modernizing it as we know it today. So thank you very much. I hope you found this interesting. And when you drive by Volta Place in Georgetown now, you'll know why it's named that. So thank you.